name is Irfan Ahmed, and today we are going to study about the basic anatomical terminology. So, basic anatomical terminology means the various terms which we use in the anatomy, which are used to describe the various positions of the body. Like I have here depicted in a diagram. These are the various positions like median, sagittal plane, superior, inferior, transverse, posterior, anterior, medial, lateral, coronal. So these all terms. So we have to understand these all terms before we can study the anatomy of any body part or anatomy of the whole body. So we will start the basic anatomical terminology means the various terms which are used in the anatomy to describe the various body parts, to depict the very body parts. So the topics here which will be discussed in this will be directional terms, planes of human body and body cavities. So these three topics will be discussed here. So I will start from the directional terms. So these are the directional terms. Now what directional terms mean? These are those terms which describe the positions of structures related to other structures or locations in the body. Means what directional terms are? These describe various positions of structures and relate them to other structures or relate them to other locations of the body. Like the first directional term is superior. Superior, or it's also called as cranial. It means towards the head end of the body. Means towards the head, whatever structure will be towards the head, that will be called as superior or called as cranial. Or we can say that upper. Okay, for example, hand is part of superior extremity. Okay, so hand is superior extremity part. Second is inferior or caudal. Inferior or caudal means away from the head, means lower. This was upper, this is lower. Example, the foot is part of the inferior extremity, means foot is lower, hand is upper. So hand is superior, foot is inferior, or hand is cranial, or foot is caudal. Just like that is the another term, that is anterior, or what we call as ventral, and that is also called as front. Anterior or ventral are also called as front. For example, kneecap is located on the anterior side of the leg, so this is anterior. We will depict in the terms. Next term, that is posterior, or also called as dorsal. Posterior means back. For example, shoulder blades are located on the posterior side of the body, means these are located at the back side of the body. So shoulder blades will be posterior, or we can say that they are dorsal. Just like them is another term, that is medial. Medial means towards the midline of the body. For example, toe, that's located at the medial side of the foot. Toe is located at the medial side of the foot. Next is lateral. What lateral means? Away from the midline of the body. Means it's away from the midline of the body. For example, little toe, that's located at lateral side of the foot. These are the examples. Next is proximal. Proximal means towards or nearest to the trunk. Okay, either it will be towards the trunk or it will be nearest to the trunk or the point of origin of part. For example, the proximal end of the femur joins with the pelvic bone. That is the example of proximal. Next is distal. Distal means away from or far from the trunk of the point of the origin of the part. That's called as distal. You can here see that distal. This is away from the trunk or the point of origin of part. So this will be distal, this will be towards, this will be proximal. Okay. For example, hand is located at distal end of forearm. This is forearm, so hand is located at distal end. This is located at proximal end. Now you can understand from these two diagrams the various terms which I explained till now. See, you can see from here, this is superior, towards the head. Away from the head, this is inferior. Superior, this is inferior. Okay, this is distal, this is proximal, this is medial, towards the midline, this is lateral, away from the midline, and dorsal and anterior, this is anterior, front part, and dorsal means towards back, anterior means towards front. So dorsal, anterior. This is superficial, this is deep posterior, inside. This is palmar, upper palm of the hand is called palmar, back side of hand is called dorsal. And this foot is called a plantar, means foot below side, that is called as plantar. The above side of the feet, that is called as dorsal. So these are the terms which are used in the anatomically. Anatomically we will use these terms. We will not say that head is closer, we can say head is superior. So these are the various terms which are used in the anatomy. So from these diagrams you can clearly see what anterior, posterior, proximal, distal and every term mean. So these are all directional terms which define the various directions of our body. So coming to the second part is planes of human body. So there are three main planes of human body which divide the body. First one is coronal plane, or which is called as frontal plane, this plane. This plane, this is called as coronal, which is indicated in the blue in the diagram. You can say that it is see that it's indicated in the blue. So coronal plane or frontal plane, it is a vertical plane running from side to side. So it runs from side to side. It divides the body or any of its parts into anterior and posterior portions. Front portion will be anterior, back portion will be posterior. So this plane is called as coronal plane or frontal plane. So second plane is sagittal plane, which is also called as lateral plane. You can see from here, sagittal plane means it is a vertical plane running from front to back. Okay, it runs from front to back. This one was from side to side, but this is from front to back. It runs from front to and divides body or any of its parts into right and left sides, right side and left side. Okay, and that's called as sagittal plane or lateral plane. Now, third is transverse plane, which is also called as axial plane. This one. This is a horizontal plane, divides the body or any of its parts into upper part and lower part. That's called as transverse. And next is median, means sagittal place through the midline of the body. This is the sagittal plane. If it runs through the midline of the body, what it will be called as median plane, into and divides the body or its parts into right and left halves. Next is body cavities. Okay, so the cavities are the spaces of the body contain the internal organs, or we can say that contain the viscera. So the two main cavities are called the ventral and dorsal cavities. The ventral is the larger cavity. It is subdivided into two parts. One is thoracic, second is abdominopelvic cavity, and it is divided by diaphragm, which is a dome-shaped respiratory muscle. Now what thoracic cavity is? The upper ventral thoracic or chest cavity. It contains heart, it contains lungs, trachea, esophagus, large blood vessels, nerves. Okay, and the thoracic cavity, it is bound laterally by the ribs and it is covered by the costal pleura, and diaphragm caudally covered by diaphragmatic pleura. So abdominal and pelvic cavity, that will be depicted in the diagram at the last. So abdominal and pelvic cavity, the lower part of the ventral abdominal cavity, it can be divided into two portions. One is abdominal portion, second is pelvic portion. So the abdominal cavity contains most of the GI tract as well as the kidneys, adrenal glands. So the abdominal cavity, it is bound cranially by diaphragm, laterally by body wall, and caudally by the pelvic cavity. So the pelvic cavity contains most of the urinogenital system. Rectum, it is bound cranially by abdominal cavity. So dorsally by sacrum and laterally by pelvis. So, and dorsal cavity, the smaller of the two main cavities, that is called as the dorsal cavity. As by the name, it contains organs which are lying more posterior in the body. So the dorsal cavity again can be divided into two portions, upper portion, or we can call it as cranial cavity, which houses the brain, and lower portion, vertebral canal, which houses the spinal cord. You can see from here, this is the thoracic cavity, which contains chest. This is diaphragm, means thoracic cavity, abdominal cavity are separated by the diaphragm, which is a dome-shaped organ. So thoracic cavity, it contains lungs and all, abdominal cavity, GI tract, pelvic cavity, it contains urinary bladder, kidneys, etc. This is the vertebral cavity, which contains vertebral column. This is the cranial cavity, which contains brain. So in a nutshell, if we divide the body cavities, you can see that from here. Dorsal cavity, it contains cranial cavity and spinal cavity. Cranial cavity, it contains brain, and spinal cavity, spinal cord. And ventral cavity, it contains thoracic cavity and abdominopelvic cavity. Thoracic cavity, in which there is lungs, and abdominopelvic cavity, in which there is abdominal cavity, in which there is GI tract. Pelvic cavity, in which there are urinary bladders, kidneys, etc. So dorsal body cavity is well protected by bones, cranial, spinal, and ventral body cavity is less protected. It contains thoracic, abdominal, pelvic, and abdominopelvic. So these are the various body cavities which we have studied till now. So this was all for the today's lecture. In the next topic, we will study about the cell, its structure, its function. So for now, thank you.